Hi, this is Brass Check, and today we're going to have a happy occasion talking with an intelligent person, which is getting harder and harder to find these days. If you've been following the scamdemic, and there really is no other word for it, you know that not only has 90, well, I don't know what percent, but a huge percentage of the population just seems to be going along with it. Whether they're going along with it because they believe it or because they just don't want to make waves is hard to tell. But really discouraging are the legions of otherwise formally, seemingly independent, intelligent commentators and journalists who are also going along with it. And that is just it's despair-provoking. And then the last piece that's really hard to deal with is the people that sort of get it, but they just want to get involved in the minutia of it instead of like addressing this at the head. So today we've got a really interesting writer. Her name is Helen Buyniski, Buyniski. She has a website called Helen. Is it Helenofdestroy?
Helenofdestroy.
Oh, okay, Helenofdestroy.com, which Helen pointed out to me is constantly having problems. I wonder why. There's a lot of good material on there. Helenofdestroy.com. You can also follow her on Twitter, which is it also Helen of?
No, it's a Velociraptor23, VELOCIRAPTURE 23. I really should have thought that through before I got a long, complicated Twitter handle to go with my long, complicated last name. But whatever, it sounded good at the time.
Well, we'll put the link. We'll put the link there. And Helen, among other things, writes for Russia Today. And she has been very successful in starting to get Russia Today to start to look at aspects of the scamdemic a little bit more critically. Took them a little bit of time to get it. And I want to say this. I don't blame anybody for the time it takes because I didn't get it instantly. It took me until February 1st. to realize that the news out of China was bullshit, but still, it does take time, and anybody can be fooled, and anybody certainly can be scared and stampeded. I think there's a famous quote that human beings lose their minds all at once and regain their sanity one at a time. Something like that. But anyway, Helen's been one of the great pioneers in calling bullshit on all this. Her stuff goes way back to February as well. We're gonna talk about one of her articles. But I want to make this point before we go on, and I say this every time we talk with a writer. We don't have the government we deserve. We don't have the medical system we deserve. We don't have the environment we deserve. But we absolutely have the media we deserve because we're all spending money on these devils. We all have our cable bill. We're all going to websites that are supported by the corporate monsters. We're spending money every day. We're voting with our wallets every day in support of the garbage news media we get. So I want to encourage everybody, when you come across a writer like Helen and you like her stuff, buy. And I don't consider it support or subsidization or any. I just think you're paying for what you're getting. When you see a good writer who's doing good work, think about all the money you're wasting on the New York Post and consider paying, frankly, something towards that ongoing research. So I say that for all writers, and I'm definitely saying it for Helen. So Helen, with that long, windy introduction, let's get to our big points today.
I did just want to say something to qualify. I can't take full credit for RT coming around to the various aspects of the corona story that are completely bogus. There have been a couple of other writers doing very, very good work. I mean, pretty much everybody at RT does very, very good work.
They do.
There are a few others there's particularly a few in the UK who have been very good with teasing out the aspects of the science that are completely phony, and I've been more focusing on the social issues. So I can't take full credit for
sure.
Around, but they're doing a very good job now, I think.
Sure, and it does take time. This something that you and I have talked about. This is a propaganda war. And we are literally like little villagers living in the jungle, and suddenly a B-52 came over us and carpet bombed us. And it's going to take a while for people to adjust. I mean, they've been planning this for a long time. They have a tremendous infrastructure in place, and frankly, nobody really saw it coming, with the exception of your colleague Harry Vox. Is that the correct way to say his name?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. We'll have to talk about him. Can you do a shout out to the UK RT folks so that you know?
I don't have their names right in front of you. Peter Andrews is one of them, though. He's been writing a lot of good stuff. He's got a degree in genetics. He knows the science, and there's a couple of other ones whose names, like I said, are not coming to me right now. But I've read their stuff on and off, and they're doing some good work. So just go on RT, look at the op-ed page. We're allowed to be a little more free with our words there than obviously is straight news. Unlike in American media, where op-eds are passed off as straight news all the time, if it's an opinion piece, we actually put it in the right place. Yeah, and
Helen and I had a really interesting conversation yesterday, and it might be interesting to recount part of it. And part of it is that, RT has to be so unbelievably careful, as all news outlets should be, and RT is, with their reporting and their fact checking and making sure everything's correct. But what I call the other side, the New York Times, Fox, CNN, the whole clown circus, they don't really have to get it right ever. And when they get it wrong, it's okay.
Yep.
And heaven forbid that, RT miss a semicolon somewhere. Well, that's just proof that it's a nefarious plot. But the New York Times can just lie us into war, lie us into social catastrophe, and it's all good. So, Helen, I'm reading, you sent me a link which inspired me to finally realize I need to talk with you live, which is this article that you started writing way back in February. We'll put a link to all these things, by the way, at the bottom of this so everybody can follow up on it. Tell us a little bit about how you first got an inkling that there was something not quite right with the narrative, and then what you did about it in terms of your own research and writing.
Well, like you mentioned earlier, Harry Vox did an interview back in 2014 for a local New York media outlet, exposing the Rockefeller Foundation's and the Global Business Network's scenarios for the future of technology and international development. Now, this is one of these things these think tanks put out, these scenarios that are supposedly just spitballing, throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks, but which is actually very clearly a plan to seize control of quote-unquote democracies and consolidate world government and all those lovely things they always have on their wish list. So that interview, of course, became very pertinent around January, February, when this pandemic was starting to hit China. And of course, when they start talking about things like, oh, well, it came from a bat in a wet market. Now, the U.S. and Western countries have been trying to get rid of these wet markets forever because they're one of the things stopping the Chinese from fully signing on to the post-technology food production system, because they, you can't, you know what you're getting if you go to a wet market. Western sensibilities might find it disgusting, but they're live animals, and at least you know that you're getting what you're paying for, and they don't really like that. So they've been trying to, every single pandemic over the last few decades, they've blamed on these wet markets. So that was one dead giveaway. Two was the immediate imposition of lockdown and all of the propaganda that was coming out of China that was frankly unbelievable. I mean, people dropping dead in the streets supposedly and convulsing wildly from a respiratory disease. What? And then, of course, you discover Event 201, which was, I mean, if the Rockefeller Foundation plan was the treatment for the film that is the coronavirus epidemic, then this was the screenplay. And I mean, you look at these news reports that they manufactured to go along with this simulation, which, for those who aren't familiar with it, was conducted at Johns Hopkins, hosted by the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, all of the usual suspects. And this happened in I believe it was in October or November. I'm forgetting which.
I think November. Believe it or not, yeah.
Okay, so October was when the Military World Games started,
oh my
and
God.
that would be the introduction vector. But I'm getting ahead of myself. No, Event 201. It was so detailed, and things started playing out in such exact ways that went along with that it just became extremely obvious what was going on here. And the more you dug, the more you came up with, like I said, the Military World Games, in which all of these countries sent their athletes to compete in Wuhan, China. Well, gee, that's an awfully large coincidence. And I mean, yeah, just the idea that, okay, so we're supposed to think that these Chinese people who are kicking our ass in all kinds of economic ways are so backwards that they're just eating bats that are contaminated with viruses. And it beggars belief that people are still this naive and still this willing to eagerly sign on to whatever foreign country their government is trying to demonize. But yeah, like I said, this the more you dug, and then the lockstep, the Rockefeller Foundation scenario had 4 different options, but lockstep was the title of the first one, and this was in which a pandemic hits. China is the first to do a totalitarian lockdown, and then all the other countries think, gee, that's a great idea, and they start mandating temperature checks, mask wearing, lockdowns, curfews, all the things that you're seeing now. And it's just that this is a little too much of a coincidence, obviously, and then especially when you see Event 201. But I mean, I would recommend that anybody read that scenario. This was written in 2010, and it mirrors exactly what we're dealing with in 2020. I mean, Bill Gates, of course, has been hailed for supposedly predicting the pandemic in 2015. It's not a prediction if you help the thing to happen. I mean, that's just planning. I mean, that's not a prediction.
And let's be clear, the thing that we're absolutely certain they planned is not necessarily a lab creation. Could be, could not be. That's a real technical issue. But the thing that they absolutely planned is what I call the media operation.
Oh, yeah.
That, no doubt, no question, planned. And you make this great point, which is that, Act 1 was China, right? And they could count on China for a number of reasons. The Chinese, because of their overreaction to SARS-1, were likely to have an overreaction to SARS-2. Yep. Then we have that person, Margaret Chan, who was head of the World Health Organization for 10 years, who's now a higher up in the Chinese government. She's been joined at the hip with Fauci and friends and Gates for decades. So you could count on China to get the ball rolling. Let me just throw out this little tidbit, which it's one of these obvious things. Tony Fauci and Margaret Chan have literally been on the payroll of Bill Gates since at least 2010. And we know that because it's public information. They're both board members of this thing that he started in 2010, which was basically the decade of the vaccination. And
Tedros is on the payroll too. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the WHO chief. He was I think he was chief of one of Gates's AIDS programs for a while, and then of course he gets the WHO appointment, and Gates is the biggest funder of the WHO. So yeah, they're all in bed together. And
you raised an interesting word there, AIDS, and we probably won't go off on this because if we go down this rabbit hole, we'll never stop. But basically, and we've covered a lot of this on Brass Check, is what everything that is happening with this COVID con is simply a playing out of the playbook that they worked out very meticulously over the last 36 years in selling the HIV equals AIDS fraud, and also the huge communications and political network they built up to sustain and prolong that fraud. So anybody, the guy that's the head of the New York Health Commissioner, who, doesn't have a degree in epidemiology, doesn't have any training in public health, doesn't have any training in infectious disease. He's a pediatric cardiologist who's also an anesthesiologist, but he was elbow deep in the AIDS world. Go figure. And he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So.
And you've also got, as far as these figures that keep popping up, you've got this Israeli biosafety analyst, Danny Shoham, who some people might remember as the guy who pinned the 2001 anthrax attacks on Saddam Hussein immediately, despite having no evidence, and despite it eventually coming out that this was a U.S. strain, I believe, that came actually from Fort Detrick, which many people think that the coronavirus, COVID-19, came from as well. But this Danny Shoham comes out and immediately says, oh, this came from a Chinese lab. Okay, so we're going to believe you, the guy who 20 years ago tried to get us into war with Iraq, which it turned out we didn't need much help getting into war with Iraq. We had an entire government willing to throw all of our resources away and do that. But the presence of this like Israeli troll basically lurking on the margins and having his every word reprinted credulously by the conservative media, who unfortunately has been just as bad as liberal media in I'm neither liberal or conservative these days because liberals have unfortunately jumped off a cliff, and I've been left a political orphan. But yeah, it's both sides, as if they were two different things, have completely gone whole hog into this totalitarian future where, I mean, it's weird. You think these militia types who always say, oh, we're going to oppose the police state. And, I mean, yeah, a few people turned out for anti-lockdown protests with their guns looking all scary, but most people were like, oh, Trump will save us. Really? You really think that? Enjoy the feeling of a needle in your arm, dude, because, I'm sorry, the vaccines are coming, and they're not going to be polite about it.
Yeah, this is one of the many bizarre aspects of this, is this legion of people that think somehow Trump is on their side with this. I mean, how do you look at what he's doing and saying and come up with that conclusion?
Well, it's a cult thing. I mean, just as there's the Trump derangement syndrome Russiagate cultists, there's the Trump, the opposite of Trump derangement syndrome, I guess, which is a form of Trump derangement syndrome in itself, like QAnon cultist people who just think that everything that Trump does wrong must secretly be something he's doing right because he can do no wrong because he is the savior of humanity, and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. I mean, it's like people in this country are programmed out of being able to think critically, and that has done untold damage to this country. I mean, so much of the problems that we're currently having, even outside the coronavirus, I'm talking about like police brutality and whatnot, could be solved with simple accountability. Hold the police accountable who do the bad deeds, and then we don't have these problems. And that's on the court system, and that's on a whole bunch of authorities who just completely refuse to do their jobs. Because why should they do their jobs? They're getting paid by outside interests, usually large corporations or foreign countries, specifically the quote-unquote only democracy in the Middle East, to do their bidding. And so, I mean, why would anybody serve the American people when the alternative is so lucrative?
Yeah, I mean, I on the police side, clearly there are a lot of people that go into police work that are really good people. Unfortunately, those that are, it's also a career opportunity for people that are fundamentally criminals.
Exactly.
And if I was serious about being a criminal and I didn't have a crime family connection that I could slip into, I would just join the police department, because you will be protected as a criminal on most police departments. And I think the structure there is really simple. The powers that be want people they can count on to bust heads when they need it for to protect themselves, over to guard their own safeguard their own criminality, or provide favors to criminals that they're in bed with. I saw this in San Francisco when I lived in San Francisco. I mean, what a corrupt police department that was. And it was all being run, the bad guys were all being run by the mayor's office, and the mayor was involved with every organized crime element you could imagine. And if you had a crack house and it was in the right neighborhood, no problem. If you were riding your bicycle in critical mass, you might get your head broken in for using the street that you're allowed to use. So I think that's the reason this evil police system is maintained, because they need a reservoir of criminals that they can call on to carry out criminal activities on their own behalf. I really think that's it.
That is it. And there's another level below that they're constructing now under the guise of quote unquote community policing. And this is the contact tracers. This is the people who are calling in to rat out their neighbors for not social distancing. The coronavirus has enabled a whole new tier of like ruling class lackeys, bootlickers, shall we say, who are willing to throw their class comrades. I mean, I'm not a communist, so just because I use that word, don't
Right.
get your panties in a bunch, but their class comrades for the chance that maybe they'll get some crumbs from the ruling class table. Okay, guys, do you generally see what happens? The collaborators are the first to go, but it's really an ugly thing. I sat through the contact tracing course because I wanted to see what these people were being taught.
You infiltrated it.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Easy to infiltrate.
Oh,
yeah.
well, tell us about that.
It's a free thing. I think people can still access it. So Johns Hopkins, of course, they're always in the middle of all these things, offers it. And they teach you different definitions of words that you've probably grown up hearing all your life. Things like autonomy, which ends, according to these people, where the public health begins. And there are these weird, like, programming language tautologies, like public health. Contact tracing is a tool used by public health officials to protect the health of the public. That's an exact quote. Why would that be a sentence that's in something that costs money to make? I really don't understand, except that it's programming. I mean, repetition will accomplish what sheer brute force cannot. And it's a pretty insidious thing. And it's clear that the course I took, of course, was just the introductory one. And you're told if there's like uncooperative people, you have to refer it to your superiors. And so clearly, if you've excelled at simply ratting people out or getting people to give up their neighbors, they teach you all kinds of techniques for convincing people to rat out their friends and loved ones and family members. If you've got a positive test, which even the New York Times now admits 90% of positive PCR tests are probably bogus. I don't understand how that's not getting more play, but I've tried to write about it as much as possible. I slip it into whatever articles I can, and this is in the New York Times. I mean, hello, and yet we still have all these idiotic lockdown regulations. I lived in New York City, and we are not, we're not allowed to eat indoors until, I think, next week. And then, of course, they're going to come up with a second lockdown and say, oh, well, see, all you guys wanting to eat indoors, you made it terrible for everybody else. So this is, I mean, it's so obvious what they're doing, and it is very frustrating for me that even like certain journalists who have a history of going after the ruling class when they do terrible things, say when they start wars or when they commit genocide or when they oppress the poor, they aren't going after this one. And I mean, you read the latest version of my article in which I explained that I was removed unceremoniously from Medium.com for pointing out a few indiscrepancies. That's not a word. Yeah. Discrepancies in the coronavirus narrative. And so they just booted me. I had had an account for 2 years and never run afoul of any of their rules. But I discovered upon looking in the help section that the example bio they give you is Melinda Gates' profile. And I look on the Gates Foundation website, and guess who's getting a bunch of money from the Gates Foundation? Medium.com. So that's obvious. And it's like, come on, guys, could you be a little more subtle? The Gates Foundation actually has removed a bunch of their older donations. So now if you look at the Gates, they have their donation recipients on the website right there. But the page used to be a lot longer. And fortunately, I saved all the old screenshots, so I have them. But if you look at it now, not all the recipients are on there, but they literally do have every single major English language media organization, plus some in other languages. I think I know Le Monde in France was on there. I think Der Spiegel in Germany, and there was a couple like German media organizations as well. So they're basically paying everybody for favorable coverage. And I wrote a whole op-ed about this. The fact that people still trust Bill Gates because he's got a sweater vest on and like talks about helping people, yet can't refrain from gibbering and squealing when he talks about human suffering. I'm sorry, this is not. It vaguely, I guess, looks human, but I don't know. I wouldn't trust it with my health, and people are doing that, and it's very, very misguided.
Wow, you've just covered a vast scope of really important stuff, and I'm going to double back on some of it and go into some greater depth. And I just want to make sure everybody grasps that very last point. So not only is Gates, underwriting Medium, which removed your writing, and has removed, by the way, there was a guy, and I wish I could remember his name. Brass Check readers can do their research and dig into the archive, and he's interesting. He's a political operative, and he's an internet marketer, and he's an internet campaigner for the Republican side. And one thing, if you get deep into internet marketing, is you do study viral spread of reposts. That's just one of the things you look into, and there's a whole math that goes along with it, and it's the same math that goes for epidemic spreads. It's the same math; it doesn't change. So he wrote a brilliant piece just showing way back, like January. I mean, this was early, or maybe not January, but early. Possibly March, actually, that just demolished all the viral projections and just showed how they were mathematical lunacy. He had 1 million visitors in just a week or two, and Medium took him down. So they're not only, there's two ways you can censor: is just don't publish anybody in the first place, make them obscure, and then the second thing is if they do manage to squeak through, like you did with your article and he did with his article, just pull it down. So you said this, which I wasn't even aware of. So not only are they underwriting Medium, they're underwriting who else? Le Monde and
Yeah, well, every English language media organization. You got NPR, National Public Radio, The Guardian, NBC Universal. Let me pull up the screenshot here. And then also French and German media. El País in Spain was on there. So they've got multiple countries under their thumb, and the fact is that none of these articles come with a warning. Like there was one, I think LA Times was doing a relatively critical investigation of the Gates Foundation, and it's paying people for I don't think it was a media thing, but it was paying people for something else. Basically conflicts of interest because they've got millions of those. But and Gates Foundation actually went over the writer's head and talked to the editor and tried to get the story killed. Now, I think the story still came out. I don't know if it still had everything in it that it was supposed to have. But yeah, we've got, they give to Johns Hopkins University, of course. National Journal Group, United Nations Foundation, Thomson Media Foundation, which is Reuters, Univision, Public Radio International, Pulitzer Center. So if you think these great journalism organizations are independent, think again. Let's see. There's a lot of them. And then they also pass through groups like New Venture Fund, which are like these sort of dark money pool things, which then distribute the funds further. And then the Gates Foundation is not specifically linked to those recipients. You've also got them giving to colleges like Boston University International Center for Journalists, which is a totally corrupt organization. Pro Social LLC, I don't know what that is. Let's see, Al Jazeera. It's like you expect Al Jazeera to at least be a little bit more aware of what's going on, but nope. And so a lot of other media organizations that aren't getting this money end up giving Gates favorable coverage by default because they just echo what other people say, or maybe they don't feel comfortable saying negative things about Gates if they can't get it to a, quote, reliable source, which, I mean, I don't want to go into a Wikipedia tangent, but Wikipedia has taken the definition of the term reliable source, turned it inside out, raped its corpse. I don't want to get too graphic here, but like the term reliable source is it's suffered quite a bit under the onslaught of Wikipedia.
And of course, Google cites Wikipedia as the most reliable source.
Oh,
essentially.
They tell their raters, they tell the people who rate the sites to get them different rankings on Google. They tell their raters to use Wikipedia to determine the reliability of a website. So if you're still using Google to search, stop it. Seriously, there are plenty of other. I mean, the search engine some dude builds in his garage is going to be more reliable than Google. You cannot find anything on Google. It's impossible.
Wow. And just to remind everybody, we're talking with Helen Buyniski, Buyniski. Her website is Helenofdestroy, Helen of destroy.com. And, I should have known this, but I didn't know it. So thank you for filling out the details for me. It makes sense. And it reminds me of a story that I'm expert in, which is strangely untold because it was the most important or the most cited news story of the late 1970s, and that of course was Jonestown. believe me, when that story hit, that was the news for a solid year and nothing else. And amazingly, no real news actually got out. But one of the many aspects of Jonestown that people didn't realize is that Jim Jones got his start in San Francisco. He actually got his start. San Francisco. Well, that's where he really congealed his base. And one of the ways that he got over was he made grants to the local newspapers. And they always treated him with kid gloves, even though there was plenty of concern among citizens in writing, activism about what the hell that guy was up to. But the local politicians were all happy with him, and the news media absolutely happy with him. And we got a website all about that. But so Gates is taking a page from Jim Jones's book.
Oh, that's very fitting because, like I've been saying for a while, this coronavirus thing is forming a cult of these, I mean, for lack of a better word, Karens or bootlickers or whatever you want to call them, who are just so either terrified by the virus propaganda itself, even though that's been hugely dismantled even in the mainstream media, or they had so little going on in their lives before that they see this as their chance to finally excel at something. And these are the people you see changing their names on social media to John Wear a Mask Smith. Right. Whatever. Like, it's like this is now part of your identity. And if you look at, I mean, I keep referring to this Byte model, this Stephen Hassan, who's a cult expert, former Mooney, the Korean cult there. He came up with this model that has about maybe a couple dozen different ways in which cults negatively affect their members. And if you look at this model that he's come up with, I even made a graphic to adapt it for the Corona era. I put a little coronavirus on there with looks familiar. But if every single one of these boxes are checked off by the cult of Corona, and it's really quite disturbing because people are diving into this head first, and because they're in isolation, and this is of course half the point of social distancing, really 3/4 of the point of social distancing is to keep people from comparing notes. I always say that if people from the left and the right compared notes, then we wouldn't have this partisan divide because we both realize that our real problem is the ruling class, and this is not a left or right thing. This is a financial thing. This is a City of London thing. This is a Rothschild thing. This is an Israel thing. I'm not anti-Semitic. This is a City of London financial thing. There are plenty of people of all ethnicities who are working for this project. So don't even start with that. I have to preemptively say that, of course, because there are plenty of trolls who would gladly jump on that R word. But yeah.
You're not allowed to say international bankers. But the fact is, there's a whole profession of people who describe themselves as international bankers.
They're not. Well, what are you supposed to do with these people? I guess it's one of those words where they're allowed to say it about themselves, but you aren't allowed to say it about them because that's privilege right there.
I mean, they're not sitting in the home office in the branch office making mortgage loans to Joe and Mary American. They're moving $1 billion capital flows, and they want to make sure that $1 billion comes back by any means necessary. And anybody that's followed even vaguely the financial news has to know that just on the most simple level, it's a very basic trade-off now. If you are J.P. Morgan, if you are Chase Manhattan Bank, if you are part of that Western, Wells Fargo, you're basically allowed to steal as long as you're willing to pay the fine. And right now, it's working about a 5% rate. So you can steal, $100 billion. Just pay the $5 billion fine when we catch you. I mean, that is literally what it has degenerated to. And this is not me saying it. This is people in the banking industry who are straight. Not everybody who's a banker is a criminal, and they just sort of look at what's going on in the industry. These are veterans, like multi-decade. They're straight people. They're trying to do a productive thing in society, and they just see the degeneracy. I mean, and it's coming apart at the seams. You made a really interesting point about cult stuff, and I want to share something with everybody. I try to keep my business life and my reporting life separate. Especially was doing that when I had a very active business life. I frankly didn't want to sabotage my income by so I just kept them separate. I'm not holding that wall up so strictly anymore. People still have to do some research and figure out who I actually am, but they can make their own efforts. But anyway, one thing I am better than average in the marketing world. I'll just say that. And one of the things I can absolutely tell you, as somebody who knows that world inside and out at the highest levels, is people who are in marketing, the really serious students of it, are all serious students of cult activity, cult methodology. Why? Because we want to sell a lot of stuff. And it turns out that people that run cults really know a whole lot about how to get customers, retain customers, and extract from customers. And if anybody thinks that there isn't a whole profession of people that know all the cult technologies and are applying them to marketing and to this corona case, you're really missing a boat there. They know exactly how all these cults work. They know every button these guys have figured out, and they are pushing them nonstop. And as Helen pointed out earlier in that, I just want to make sure everybody understands that this is not some random. Gee, it kind of looks like they're doing that. No, they are doing that, and they know exactly what they're doing. I wish we could have a whistleblower. I wish somebody could keep their iPhone on and would record in one of these meetings, and maybe somebody has, and we never.
Yeah, it's like that thing at Simpsonwood, the vaccine conference that later ended up being such a scandal, in which they tried to memory hole evidence that mercury was harming people. Somebody actually kept their copies of that, even though they were ordered to burn everything and destroy everything. So I'm pretty sure that somebody has got some of these meetings. I mean, even the outtakes of Event 201, there's got to be somebody who's got some recorded. Maybe a janitor who had to linger a little too long in between emptying trash bins or something. Because I find it very difficult to believe that seeing what's going on right now, seeing hundreds of thousands of businesses in New York City alone have been permanently shuttered thanks to our mini Mussolini Cuomo there, and of course de Blasio, who just wants to be Cuomo, which is kind of like wanting to be, I don't know, what's the most disgusting person you can think of? Sheldon Adelson.
Yeah.
Wanting to be Sheldon Adelson.
Yeah.
It's so gross. And these people have destroyed people's lives, and surely there's got to be someone out there with a conscience who was there at either Event 201 or one of these other meetings. I mean, there have been so many of these simulations. I think the only catastrophic event that's had more simulations that we're supposed to believe were total coincidences before it was possibly the 9/11 attacks, which I think there was 40-something simulations that exactly echoed the real events that we were supposed to just swallow and say, well, gosh, that's a really major coincidence. But the corona, there was at least 7 or 8 that I know of. And then, of course, you got the Dark Winter one, which was back in 2001, which basically simulated the anthrax attacks, which then, of course, all of the same participants in that one went on to work in the medical industrial complex, and many of them have roles in what we're currently dealing with. So it's somebody out there has got to have a conscience. I don't know. Maybe they're laying low for a while. Maybe they're trying to get their affairs in order because they realize they're probably going to be killed. Obviously these people are not anyone to trifle with, so I can understand why they might be hesitant to come forward. But it's this is really humanity's last chance to make a stand, because once they roll out the control grid that they've got planned here, which is digital currencies, total 5G universal 24/7 surveillance, real time of everything, and mass vaccination of these experimental compounds with nanoparticles in them, and all of this really disturbing stuff. I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory. There are actual scientific articles about And MIT Technology Review has even bragged about these like hydrogels and this luciferase molecule, which of course sets the Christians in the audience all a Twitter, but like justifiably so, because this is okay. So you're going to put a thing that can be read by smartphone under your skin, but you can't see it, but the authorities could read it, and that's just totally fine. Yeah, no, let's totally do that. And it's like the World Economic Forum has been so obvious about this. For one thing, rolling out their known traveler digital identity, which is essentially the health passports they're talking about now. And so nobody is publicly, at least, putting two and two together, except a few people in the alternative media. I mean, I think Last American Vagabond is doing a good job in exposing these things. Whitney Webb, who writes on that site and has her own site, Unlimited Hangout, I think it's called, is doing a good job. But a lot of these people tend to, their articles or videos are so packed with details that eventually the main picture gets lost. And I think that, we really all need to be working together to put the message in such a capsule that it can be understood by the general population, and it will wake up the general population to the fact that this is something that we will not be able to come back from. The Patriot Act and the post 9/11 crackdown was really, really bad for American civil liberties. People who grew up before that barely recognized the world after that. I was right on the cusp there, so I saw both sides, and it was really alarming, even though I was just a teenager. But this is a worldwide thing, and there's not going to be any way out of it. If you've got full-time, real-time surveillance, they try to distract from the real issues with 5G by making it, 5G causes coronavirus. No, it doesn't, and that's not really the thing. So that's a psyop. But it does allow for 24/7 real-time surveillance of literally everything. And so it should be opposed for that reason, not for some bogus crap that you read in a QAnon forum.
Yeah, wow. Again, so much stuff. Let's highlight a couple of things. The very last thing that you said, which I think really is important for people to understand, is part of this this mass lying, for lack of a better, is to float fake stories to distract people and create confusion. So, for instance, talking about 5G, as killing people. Interestingly enough, there's a guy who did die this summer very quickly. I was literally going to interview him on a Thursday. He called me on a Tuesday saying he just received a cancer diagnosis and he was dead within a month. His name is David Crowe, Crowe, and he's very interesting because not only was he one of the best reporters on all these viral frauds, and there have been many of them. That's the thing people just may not be aware of. But all these things, Ebola, Zika, SARS-1, they've all been super hyped, super exaggerated, super fraudulent stories. Now, do people get sick? Yes. Are viruses a possible contribution to illness? Maybe, very possibly. But the rest of it's all bullshit. Just to make it to simplify. So David's been doing reporting on this for 20. I don't know if it's 20 years, but it was a decade plus. But he was also a super heavyweight double black belt in telecommunications technology. He knew everything about 5G and all that stuff. And he is not a guy who would have covered for 5G if he saw any possibility that it was a biological risk. Now, that doesn't mean he's wrong. That doesn't mean he was right. Maybe he missed it. But here's a guy that knew the biology, was absolutely ferociously courageous, and was a super black belt in the technology. And he just didn't see the problem. So the point I want to make is maybe 5G is biologically destructive. I don't know either way, but I do know that by pushing that 5G is this and that, it's a distraction, and it gets people focused on the wrong thing. And what Helen was talking about is that 5G. What we do know about 5G is it is the mega surveillance technology of all time. Once that thing is activated, and I got to tell a 5G story, by the way. I live in the country, right? I'm 100 miles north of New York City. I can ride my bicycle to an apple orchard, chickens, the whole bit. It's exurbia up here, right? So we wanted to get some telecom work done on a house next to ours that we just bought because, for long story short, it was all screwed up, and we need somebody to come in and really fix what was done. So he said, and we're talking with him in the spring, and I said, and he's one of the few people that's licensed to actually go on the utility pole and do what needs to be done. It's that complicated a thing, right? So we're talking with this guy. He's a straight guy, good guy. He got about 80 people working for him. And I said, when can you do it? He goes, I can't do anything until the fall. We're installing 5G everywhere up here. All these little local county governments. This is March, folks. We're in the middle of a pandemic. The whole world, everyone's got to work. No one can work. Only the most essential people can go out and do anything productive. And this is a telecom guy who's so freaking busy in the middle of the pandemic installing 5G for Greene County. I mean, Greene County's got like 100,000 people in it. It's all trees and rocks, but somehow they had the money and the planning to do this vast 5G installation on the county government level all throughout upstate New York. So anyway, I just wanted to, I got so many things in my head sometimes that I haven't had a chance to put down on paper, so it's great to talk with Helen about this. But just wanted to let everybody know that, yeah.
No, I mean, that's another way that you can tell how this was very clearly planned out beforehand, if not the virus itself, which, I mean, there is significant evidence that the virus itself did escape from a lab, whether it was from a U.S. lab by U.S. incompetence, or the U.S. lab with Israeli help, whatever it was, there's plenty of evidence. But the fact that the response was so clearly coordinated, because you have these, there were so many reports. Now, a lot of these weren't confirmed, so I didn't report them at the time because I'm not going to, put my neck out for things that could very easily be psyops. But a lot of people were seeing 5G equipment being installed at schools and things that were shut down for the pandemic. And it just seemed odd that, okay, well, why is everybody rushing this 5G into effect, especially when there's been so much opposition to it? Because people are afraid, whether of the health effects, which there do seem to be certain kinds of health effects, but I don't know about the idea that it causes coronavirus. There's no evidence for that, and that's like, again, a psyop. But it was developed as a weapons system, so that's another thing. But it's like there's clearly coordination beforehand, and the idea that these restrictions were just all imposed organically by these local governments, and no, because they all point in the same direction, and that is, I mean, even Bill Gates is on it. He wants a 24/7 satellite system surveilling the entire world. Well, gosh, I mean, it's not like you're a cartoon supervillain or anything. It's just like these same people keep coming up again and again, and even in the early days of the pandemic, they were trying to say, this is because of climate change, and nobody really bit that. And so it kind of went into the background for a while, but now you're seeing it more again. And so one of the things I was talking to you yesterday about is how these things that they can't sell at the beginning because they're so absurd, they put them on ice and they wait a few months and then they reel them out again. Like, we're supposed to think that a respiratory virus causes hair loss. Okay, sure, that's reasonable. No, but after 6 months of being fed complete nonsense, then your idea of what's reasonable and what's not starts to shift a little bit. And they just wait for the right time to deploy whatever of their psyops is ripe at that moment.
That's a really good point about the climate change. Is that I see that theme reemerging really powerfully now. That this is due to climate change, we're going to have an outbreak of all kinds of epidemics, and we just have to get used to it. I mean, the funny thing, not funny, but the United States conducted a massive war in Southeast Asia in the 60s, right, in the 70s. We sent millions of people in and out of there, right? Nobody was into jungles, which really do have all kinds of wild diseases and stuff. And there was a massive of kind of Asia flu outbreak, I think in '69. That really killed a lot of people, right? nobody worried about it. Nobody talked about slowing the war down or quarantining the troops that were over there. It's just the whole thing is just mad. So. Yeah, so the 5G clearly, whatever their intention is, it's wired with the corona because the timing is just too crazy.
Well, they want the total surveillance. I mean, that's the whole point of known traveler digital identity, these health passports where, you have to be able to show. I mean, if you actually read the World Economic Forum's white paper, it's not only, where you spent money, what borders you've crossed, what interactions you might have had with the law, but it's also behavioral evaluations from the places you stayed or behavioral evaluations from people at the border. Say, this guy looks kind of shifty. Maybe you should keep an eye on him. I mean, it's really, really, I know this word is being overused, but it's because it's applicable, Orwellian. And it's like, so 5G is just one part of a larger puzzle. And it's interesting that you mentioned that nobody thought of slowing the war down. If you look at what the restrictions they're placing on people at home in places like New York or Los Angeles or other large cities, compared to the fact that they completely refuse to pause hostilities abroad in places like Syria or Afghanistan or anywhere. I'm speaking of the U.S. here.
Sure.
It's very telling because obviously, I mean, if the virus was a real threat and they really were worried about soldiers getting sick, they would pause the wars. There have been large resolutions at the UN to put hostilities on ice because, I mean, don't we all have to respond to this world-ending pandemic? Well, apparently not, because the U.S. is perfectly keen to keep fighting those wars. And so it's, I mean, that's kind of one of many dead giveaways, is that if it really was the world-ending threat we're told it was, well, they would stop fighting for a bit and, retreat.
Well, and the military is exquisitely informed with a massive infrastructure on dealing with epidemics because they know that it's disease that is the biggest killer of troops, or historically, not gunshot wounds or battle wounds. It's just people just you got all these guys living in a camp in unsanitary conditions, and it's just a recipe for death, basically. And so the military knows everything about epidemic spread, and they're not worried at all about this thing. In fact, there was a scandal in which the military got Pentagon got $1 billion for corona, stuff, and they just spent it on weapons, and the reason they did, and I don't blame them, because that's the business they're in, and there was no need for them to do anything about corona because it's bullshit. So they did.
It's almost what they said. I mean, they said, well, we reached the limit of what we could reasonably needed to do, so we just took the money and spent it on drone technology and et cetera, et cetera. And my question was to Congress, what do you expect? These people lost 22 trillion. Was it 22 trillion? It was something like that. Yeah, the Pentagon lost 22 trillion over the years since 9/11. And okay, so where's that money?
Yeah, and so the military knows a lot, and they are not concerned. I have a photo somewhere it's got a picture of one guy in a hazmat suit, then it has one soldier in a with a mask, and standing right next to him are two other superior officers, not wearing masks at all. It's like, well, there's the pecking order right there. If you're a low-wage service worker or a private, you're going to wear that stupid mask and you're going to wear that stupid hazmat suit. But we're running the show. We're not wearing any masks. That's for you guys.
This is what you see in these arrests that have been going viral on social media. There was a woman the other day who was arrested somewhere in the U.S., a woman with asthma, so she wasn't wearing a face mask, but she was at some public event. I think she was keeping distance from other people, too, but all of these cops converged on her. Half of them weren't wearing masks, and one of them tased her. Yep. Okay, so you're tasing a woman for not wearing masks. She's not breathing on anybody. She's got a respiratory condition that should exempt her. I mean, supposedly this is what we've done. We say people with respiratory conditions that they shouldn't have to. But, okay, so the cops without the masks are going to swarm her and attack her. And this is just getting us used to this is going to randomly happen to people in the street all the time. You have a wrong think post on social media. They're already doing this in England. They've been doing this for years. you got to knock at the door. And I saw your Twitter post, ma'am. That was very insensitive, and you had better take it down or you're going to jail. Or in Australia, where they just put you in jail anyway. Oh, the woman who promised to take it down in Victoria. And she was not allowed to do so. She was hauled away in front of her 2 kids in her pajamas, like hours before she was supposed to get an ultrasound appointment because she was pregnant. It's like, it's cartoonish violence, and this, I really do think that this is part of the sideline program to replace our current very patchwork system of police, where there are some police forces that are good people in general, but there are also extremely corrupt police forces. Again, I live in New York City. We got one of them. You mentioned San Francisco, and there are a lot of cities have this big problem with police just being literally organized crime. But then if you go to a small town, the police will actually be helpful sometimes. I mean, it depends on where you are. But it's like they want to replace that with a standardized system. And they also want to, once they have a national police force, then they can also start introducing things like robots. And yesterday we saw a robot, Boston Dynamics robot dog, wandering the streets of some, didn't say which town, but some place in Canada. And everybody was like, oh, it's so cute. And no, mount a gun on that thing, and you're not going to be saying that in 5 years.
Wow. You know, about sort of bifurcated law enforcement, it's something that we should mention because it's a reality. Like, you take something like the FBI. You know, the FBI has a lot of really professional, dedicated people. You know, they work, you know, in white collar crime areas and you know, child trafficking, and, you know, busting those people. You know, and those guys exist. They're even involved in catching political criminals and sometimes prosecuting them, right? So there's an infrastructure there that's real, that's legit, but there's absolutely a wing of the FBI that is completely criminal operation, and those guys are maintained and allowed to, you know, function because they are needed. I think we certainly have the same thing with the CIA. You know, a lot of professional people, and then people that are just, I mean, they brag about it. I can't tell you the number of quotes by actual high-level and sometimes low-level CIA people, public quotes where they go like, yeah, we lied, cheat, steal, rape, pillage. And
that's Pompeo himself,
yeah.
The non-kosher pig of the military-industrial complex. I mean, what a disgusting creature. It's really funny because, like, when you see him go to Israel, which is, of course, his favorite place in the whole wide world, they don't want to touch him because the dude just exudes pork. It's like, it's so not kosher that, like, I mean, I think Jews and Muslims alike would both shrink back because it's like, ew, you can't even, ew. Yeah. He's literally a pig in human form. I mean, it's so disgusting. I mean, I think he's personally done more to turn world opinion against the United States than really anybody except Bush's initial launch of the war on terror. But he's such a disgusting person. And the fact that we're represented by a person like this really should outrage any American because it's just so vile. I mean, ew.
And it's okay for him to go on record saying that it's a joke that we commit crimes.
Yeah.
You know, hey, I want to go back to and we probably need to start wrapping it up. We'll have to do more of these if you're willing.
Of course.
Yeah. But I want to go back to something that you said way back when, and it's very intriguing. And I don't know if you've written an article about it, but boy, it merits an article, which is the fact that there is this snitch training program that's going on. I think this is really an interesting thing. I just want to ask you a few questions about it. So how did you find out about it? Is it like advertised?
Yeah, there were articles that were going out a couple months ago when it seemed like, okay, well, the unemployment program was still in force, giving people who had been laid off $600 a week or whatever. But it was starting to look like it was going to peter out. And so they ramped up their publicity of, oh, well, if you want to be a contact tracer, you can make as much as $65,000 a year, which, I mean, that's pretty good money. And you can live on that quite easily, quite comfortably. But they were really pushing it hard. And they had, some of these articles had links to the Johns Hopkins program, which was a free thing on Coursera, Coursera.com, which is an online course hub. I had never heard of it before, but apparently there's a lot of people who put their courses on there. And so, yeah, you can go on there and take a free contact tracing course. I did a rather more in-depth interview about this with Spiro Skouras, who writes for Activist Post. Maybe we can include that in the links, because I actually play a few of the sound clips from the woman who's, of course, they always use these like non-threatening, mousy women to do the most authoritarian stuff. And so, like, this non-threatening mousy woman is redefining autonomy and redefining like rights and stuff like that. So it's really disturbing. But I found out about it by reading it in the news. They were really pushing this heavy on New Yorkers who had been either furloughed or rendered unemployed. And I figured, I want to see what they're teaching these people, because if I get a call, I certainly want to know what this person is going to be operating about. And of course, for some reason, they never take into account the most obvious stuff, which is why I do think there's a way to beat these people, because they're really stupid in some ways. I mean, they've been subject to the same dumbing down as we have. And I mean, maybe for the ruling class children, it's less, but it's still a dumbing down. And so they assume, okay, people are going to pick up a phone call from a number they don't know.
Right.
People are going to do that?
Right, they didn't think.
Sorry. I don't think people are going to do that. Certainly not in New York City. I don't know about other places, but I would never pick up a phone number from some random number. That's silly.
Yeah, they didn't think that one through. Oh, great. So we'll definitely put a link to that so that people can go in depth, because that's a huge story, I think.
Definitely.
Well, we've been talking with Helen Buyniski, 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 and her website is Helenofdestroy.com. We're also going to put a link to her Twitter. We're going to put a link to her website, of course. We're going to put a link to this article that really got me going, that she started work on in February. We're going to put a video link to the Harry Vox comments way back in, did you say 2014?
2014, yeah. He had found that Rockefeller document, and at the time that was when Ebola was a big thing. So the interview, he mentions Ebola, but where you hear Ebola, think coronavirus, and it's very, very prescient, and there's a reason why that interview has gotten hundreds of thousands of views. He really nailed it. And
then we'll put it really, guys, it's amazing. You should watch that video. I think we've actually broadcast that video, but we want to recommend everybody watch it again. And then you have this interview with Spiro
Skouras, yeah.
Great, on the snitching program, the paid snitches program, which is really what it is. And I just want to throw out one last little quick thing before I forget, and maybe we'll go into this. The same people that wrote, that actually not published, but the ones that authored the article that Harry put a spotlight on, are the same people that founded Wired Magazine and turned Wired Magazine into a choke point, so that nothing progressive, nothing politically conscious, nothing politically socially aware ever appeared in the pages of Wired Magazine. And all you saw was transhumanist, military bootlicking, technology, billionaire bootlicking crap, all wrapped in a very fascinating technological narrative, which is fascinating. It's intrinsically fascinating. But so the very same human beings that wrote that scenario about how we can take over the world using a virus as a front are the same people that basically hijacked the digital revolution and turned it into what it is today, a disaster for humanity. But Twitter helped me find Helen, so it's not all bad. Helenofdestroy.com, and I say this whenever we interview anybody: you don't get the government you deserve, you don't get the environment you deserve, you don't get the medical system you deserve, but we do get the media system we deserve. We must support in all ways, sharing the work, encouraging our writers. We can't take them for granted, because there aren't a lot of them, in case you haven't noticed. There's not a lot of people out there doing a good job on this story. So, Helen, thank you so much for your work, and we look forward to talking with you again.
All right, thank you. I just want to say one thing before we go, because my website goes down a lot these days. I'm having a lot of problems. I'm working on building a new one, but I have a chapter in a book that Cynthia McKinney, former congresswoman from Georgia, Cynthia McKinney recently published called When China Sneezes. And in that, I go into quite a bit of detail in how this virus is being used to lay out the police state that is going to completely enslave humanity in the future. I'm not prone to hyperbole, but that is exactly what they're planning on doing. So you can order that from Clarity Press, and hopefully the new and improved Helenofdestroy.com will be up in a week or two. But if you see that it's down, never fear. I'm aware of this. I've got a lot of enemies, and hopefully we can vanquish them.
Great. Well, thank you for telling us about that book, and I'm going to send you a list of links that I need from you if you would send them back to me. And make sure the book link is in them. I'll put it in the list. Sure. Great. Well, have a great rest of the day. It's a nice Saturday, and we can still enjoy ourselves. The sun's shining, and we can still breathe air.
For now.
All right. All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.